We want to bring you some breaking news right now, just into our newsroom from the 2024 campaign trail. Joe Biden has just officially crossed the delegate threshold for the Democratic nomination for president. The NBC News Decision Desk projecting just moments ago Biden winning the Democratic primary in Georgia. You can see it was not close at all. Current President Biden winning 95% of the vote there. Just 1% in, but that's still obviously a massive threshold there. Biden's portion of Georgia's 108 delegates, allowing him to hit that magic number you see on the right hand of your screen, 1,968 delegates, now making him the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. For more on Biden's big win tonight, I want to get right to NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. He's been covering the Biden campaign and all things Biden for us for several years. Mike, how's the campaign and/or the president reacting to this news tonight?
Well, Tom, we should expect to hear from the president himself in the form of a paper statement any moment now. The campaign had been anticipating this moment. How did he get there? Georgia is the state that put him over the top. Georgia's primary, among others, today. We just called the state for the president. Georgia, of course, President Biden won in 2020 and will be another battleground state yet again this fall. We saw the president just campaigning in Georgia over the weekend. The president tomorrow has some stops planned in another battleground state, the state of Wisconsin, which was one of the closest of the 2020 battlegrounds, decided by just over 20,000 votes. And so we should expect to see and hear from the president marking this significant moment, Tom. And I'm really struck thinking about Joe Biden's career. He's run for president now 4 times, unsuccessfully, 1988 and 2008, successfully in 2020, and yet again, another muted celebration. In 2020, the reason, of course, was COVID-19. Just when candidate Joe Biden started to really gain that momentum, big wins on Super Tuesday, COVID-19 essentially shut down the campaign. He celebrated that milestone moment with the rest of us in COVID lockdown. Tonight, the president is in the White House. He'll certainly mark that moment in a more celebratory way when he's out on the campaign trail tomorrow, though.
Mike, there have been persistent doubts about whether Biden would actually end up being his party's nominee, given concerns about his age among Democrats as polling numbers. Is there any sense that those whispers will now be shut down by this result, or you think we'll be hearing those calls for him to step aside through the convention?
Well, Tom, you only need to look at the story you were talking about with Gabe earlier for one of the reasons why there have been persistent questions about the president and his candidacy this year. His age. We saw, though, that State of the Union address just last week really was a real shot of confidence for a lot of Democrats who wanted to see President Biden showing that fire, showing that fight ahead of what's going to be the longest general election campaign, one of them in American history, against Donald Trump. And President Biden certainly showed that on Thursday night during that State of the Union address. One thing to watch for, Tom, though, there still are going to be primary elections between now and June. There are states like in Michigan, in Minnesota, where we will see uncommitted or some version of uncommitted on the ballot. There are still a lot of Democrats who have concerns about this president, who want to send him a political message about his support for Israel in their war against Hamas and the treatment of Palestinian civilians. And so that will be sort of a protest vote that still continues that we'll be watching closely. But for the perspective of most Democrats, this is a nomination that's sealed up and delivered for the president.
Mike, walk our viewers through what we can expect for the re-election campaign and what it's going to look like for President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris.
Well, it's certainly been a slow start, hasn't it, Tom, for the president? Hasn't been out necessarily on the campaign trail in the way a lot of Democrats would have liked to have seen. That really has changed, though. You saw the president using Super Tuesday when Donald Trump became essentially the presumptive Republican nominee to really sharpen that contrast. He is now in what the Biden campaign is calling a month of action, ramping up his travel schedule, as is the vice president, who was in another battleground state, Colorado, today. We're going to be seeing the two of them out in force. The Biden campaign actually announcing a joint campaign event for the president and vice president later this month in North Carolina. And you have seen, not just on the campaign trail, but in all forms of media, campaign spending. The Biden campaign announcing they're going to be spending more on TV and digital ads in the next 6 weeks than they spent all of 2023. And also the use of prominent campaign surrogates as well. That's something we're also starting to see fan out in force.
Yeah, talk to me about those surrogates, because we're going to have one of the longest general election campaigns we've seen in a very long time. We're not even in the middle of March, and yet we know who the nominees are likely to be. So who are the team of surrogates, and who would you put at the top of that list for the president that are going to help him campaign through into November?
Tom, I think this is one of the more interesting parts of the Biden reelection strategy because, as one senior official in the Biden campaign put it, we have LeBron James. Now, some might disagree that Biden is the LeBron James of politics, but we have LeBron James out there, but we need to put a supporting cast around them. And the president has called himself that bridge to the next generation of Democratic talent. And they have what's called the National Advisory Board, more than 50 Democratic up-and-comers, really, who are going to be out in different ways to support President Biden's reelection effort. You look to see just what we saw over the weekend. President Biden went down, as I mentioned, to campaign in Georgia on Saturday. Who was with him? Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, seen as real part of the future for Democrats going forward. We also see them using this stable of surrogates to address some of the real vulnerabilities. So let's talk about Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost. He is the youngest member of Congress in his 20s. He is going to be a key emissary for the campaign to young voters. You look at the likes of Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, potential future Democratic presidential candidates themselves. They're going to be spending a lot of time for the president in their home states, which are battlegrounds, not just campaigning, but using their political muscle, using their own political operations to support Biden in those key states. And don't forget about President Obama. He has committed himself. He said he's all in for his former running mate's reelection effort. He's, of course, joining Joe Biden later this month, along with Bill Clinton, for a rare three presidents fundraiser. And when you talk about Barack Obama, you also have to talk about Michelle Obama. We were the first to report the statement from the former First Lady expressing her support for Biden and Harris in 2024. She's likely to have a more limited role than her husband, but she is certainly somebody with big star power in the party that a lot of Democrats hope to see out as well.
Mike, if you can take out your political crystal ball for a second here, for the benefit of our viewers, if you will, do you think we will see a debate between President Biden and former President Trump? And will we see just one, or do you think we'll see the traditional 3 or 4?
Well, there's so many layers to this discussion, Tom. Of course, there is that traditional, the Commission of Presidential Debates that tends to organize these. They've already announced dates and locations for the presidential as well as the one vice presidential debate, but neither campaign has committed to participating in them. There is eventually going to be potentially some negotiation among emissaries for each campaign. We've already heard from Donald Trump, even though the Republican National Committee platform states that they will not participate in any of these CPD debates. Trump has made it clear now he thinks he wants to participate with the president. The Biden campaign has not yet committed, and they point to the way those 2020 debates were handled to express why they're hesitating about participating. One, there, of course, were COVID protocols that were violated in the Biden team's view by the Trump team in that first debate. Of course, we found out Donald Trump, then the president, had COVID-19 when he was on the stage with Joe Biden 4 years ago. But also the way in which the rules of the road for these debates that the candidates are supposed to agree to were essentially ignored by the candidates. So there has been some discussion of maybe there isn't going to even be a debate. What we might see are back-to-back candidate forums involving both of these candidates, where they would be subject to questions from a panel or at least an individual moderator. That would be unprecedented, unusual, considering what we typically see, but a long way to go in this unprecedentedly long general election campaign.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, it's been a very unusual campaign, so we shouldn't be surprised by anything. Mike Memoli, we appreciate all your reporting.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.